I know we have a lot of people that are still kind of coming in, and they probably will trickle in, but I want to go ahead and get started kind of with the intro, so we can get Jack up here. I know he wants to spend time.
Yeah.
Good morning, I'm Stephanie Stoss. I'm a physical therapist assistant and homeschooling mom of 2 boys, including one who suffered a vaccine injury. I'm also proud to be the PR and steering chair for Ohio Advocates for Medical Freedom. Thank you everyone for joining us today for Health Directions in Neurodevelopmental Disorders. I'd like to give a special thank you to the Institute of Holistic Leadership and the Penny Integrative Medical Center, as well as Unity Spiritual Center, for their gracious support in helping us make this event possible. And of course, a very big thank you to Donna Kazee and Janet Levitin for helping me with event planning and promotion, and last but not least to our devoted OAMF volunteers. Some of our speakers have books available for purchase and signing after the Q&A session, so please visit the tables located at the back of the auditorium there if you're interested in purchasing. Our vendors are located down the hall. You may have already been down there, and to your left in the spirit room. Please visit them during break periods and the lunch hour. We ask that questions for speakers be held until the end of the day. Your programs have a nice large area for taking notes, so you can jot those down. For those that pre-purchased lunches, we'll have those available down at the vendor room at noon. If you didn't get a chance to order, we did order several extras that you can purchase down there as well. If you're utilizing the CEU program, we just want to remind you that if you didn't already sign in this morning to do that, and also you need to sign back in after lunch. The restrooms are straight down that hall, and on the left, the men's is kind of when you first go by that coat closet, and if you go around the corner, the women's is there. We do have a small nursery a few doors down from that on the left-hand side if you need to nurse, change diapers, or you just need a little quiet time with your infant if you have one here. There's also a classroom kind of on the right-hand side that's marked if you need to take a child down there to have some quiet time or let them run around and play for a little bit. There's other events going on in nearby rooms, so we just ask that people with children down there keep them, relatively quiet so they're not running and yelling in the hallway. If you have any questions at any point during the day, feel free to ask somebody that has an OAMF name tag on for assistance, and we'd be happy to help you. We ask that we don't have anybody filming today. The only presenter that's allowing us to film, or if you want to do Facebook Live or whatever, that is Dr. Lyons-Weiler, who will be up first. It's okay to film him. Otherwise, we're filming, and we will be posting that on our website for people to view. Ohio Advocates for Medical Freedom is a grassroots organization focused on protecting parents' rights to vaccine choice and informed consent, as well as fighting for the rights of employees to maintain their autonomy over their bodies in the workplace. Hospitals and other healthcare facilities across the state are currently able to discriminate against and fire employees for not accepting the flu vaccine. Despite multiple studies, including comprehensive reports from the Cochrane collaboration showing poor effectiveness across all targeted age groups for flu vaccines, a national vaccine injury compensation program that pays out 60% of their claims to flu shot injuries, despite an official Ohio Nurses Association position statement that says influenza vaccination programs should be voluntary, and the union members also are allowed all 3 exemptions, and the AMA Medical Code of Ethics recommending all 3 vaccine exemptions should be provided for doctors, we continue to have health employees be coerced into taking flu shots or suffer discrimination or termination in our state. We recently reintroduced our Employee Health Autonomy Bill, which is HB 193, that is back on the table. It will prevent employers from taking disciplinary action against employees choosing to decline this invasive medical procedure with known risk and little health benefit. The time is now to protect our healthcare workers. Please, these types of vaccine mandates will be imposed upon other professions. It is not a matter of if, it's a matter of when. Please help us in our fight today by visiting one of our tables and signing a letter to your legislator showing your support of HB 193. Financial contributions are also very helpful as well, since we are up against big lobbying efforts. Okay, without further ado, I would like to introduce our first speaker, Dr. James Lyons-Weiler. He is the CEO of the Institute for Pure and Applied Knowledge and has conducted over 100 research studies in biomedicine, analyzing genetic, genomic, proteomic, and clinical data. He has analyzed the data over 2,000 studies and has outlined a high priority research needed to bring our understanding of autism into the area of personalized medicine. Please welcome Dr. James Lyons-Weiler.
Thank you so much. Everybody hear me okay? All right. Good morning. I am very pleased to be here, and I want to thank the Ohio Advocates for Medical Freedom, and I want to thank you for taking the time to be here to discuss and consider some of these important things we're going to be talking about today. I worked for 16 years in biomedical research. Most of that time I was at the University of Pittsburgh, worked at the Cancer Center for 7 years, and I directed the bioinformatics analysis core there for 6 years, and then I worked at the bioinformatics analysis core as a director for 7 years, where I designed and analyzed biomedical studies of all kinds of questions in biomedicine. I was the main guy at the core. And the PIs would come to me, that's the principal investigator, and they would ask me, okay, we want to understand insulin, we want to understand the role of insulin in diabetes, let's say, and some people respond to it, some people don't. Can we predict which patients are going to respond to chemotherapy? Can we look at biomarkers, genetic biomarkers? Can we look at proteins and so on? And in the serum, and we had to analyze 450,000 peptides in a single serum sample from a single milliliter to try to identify ways to detect cancer early, and so on. It was a fascinating period of my life. Not once did I ever study a vaccine. Not once did I ever study anything related to vaccines except for through immunology directly. But here today, I'm not going to talk about my book. There's a bit of a switch up because we came to a set of results that I'm confident are important enough to share with you. These are technical results. I'm going to try to do my best to reach you. I understand we're in a diverse crowd here. Anyway, what I want to talk to you about today is, you hear all the time, there's been so many studies that have shown time and time again that vaccines don't cause autism. First of all, the studies that were conducted are association studies, and those association studies are not randomized clinical trials that are designed to determine causality in the first place. There are, by definition, correlation studies, and a correlation study can never determine causality. So right from the beginning, when they say we looked at 1,000 patients that were vaccinated and 1,000 patients that had not been vaccinated, we looked at autism rates retrospectively, back in time, they're looking at a correlation. So if they find that there's a correlation that's found, the answer is, oh, there's insufficient evidence for causality, each and every time across these studies. But if they do find a negative result, they present it strongly to say, look, there's no association, so there's no cause, which, is a gimme. But I'm going to play on their terms. I'm going to play on their turf. I'm going to take their science today, and I'm going to look at it as if it could have caused causality, if the statistical result was significant or not significant, as if it was a critical test, what Karl Popper, the great philosopher of science, said was a critical test of a hypothesis. And what we came to in this study so far was a determination where I want to share with you when negative results are not a result at all. What I'm going to show you are that some really critical studies might as well have never been conducted. Okay? Advance. Got to turn it on. Janet, walk me through this. Sorry. So I'll just call to the next slide. That's fine. So I want to talk with you about the Institute for Pure and Applied Knowledge. We are a pure public charity. Okay, thank you. We only survive on the donations from the public. That way I don't have to answer to, or me and the other scientists, we don't have to answer to the broken culture of modern science, which I participated in and helped build for 16 years. We're the People's Research Institute in a very real way. I listen to the population and say, what do you want to know? Okay, what kind of research can we do? And our objective is to reduce human pain and suffering through knowledge. And there's a list of projects here. I wish I had the whole day to talk, because I could tell you so many interesting things about Zika and unsafe epitopes in vaccines that we're finding that match human proteins. And I could tell you about specific steps that we're outlining to reduce risk of neurological damage and autoimmune damage, disease from vaccines, and the CDC Accountability Project. There's so many studies we have going on. Okay, Janet. This should be simple. Could you go to the next slide, please? I've written 3 books. I'll just go to the. I'll just call for it. So the 3 books I've written. The first one's on Ebola. Okay, I'll do that. Okay, here we go. Boy, have I got it down now. Could you put me back at the original slide? Thank you. So the first book is on Ebola. And in doing this study on Ebola, I found the CDC saying things like there are no mutations in this virus in testimony to Congress. That really tipped off a problem for me because every virus has mutations. They were trying to say that there's no way that there would be an outbreak in the United States that we have to be concerned about. And that might reassure the public, but it's scientifically inaccurate. And it's misleading because there were 396 mutations in that virus that I was studying to determine if the reason why it was spreading so fast was because of changes in the biology of the virus. And they were saying there were no mutations. Cures versus Profits, the second book, and this is where I fell down the vaccine rabbit hole. The first, I have a chapter in that book. This book is about so many different research studies in biomedicine. It's written for the public. And I wanted to celebrate the successes in biological research, biomedical research. And when it came to vaccines, it was going to be easy. Right? Everyone knows vaccines are great, they save millions of lives, and so on. And then I remembered the question about Andrew Wakefield. This was before the movie Vax came out. This was before the CDC whistleblower, William Thompson, came out. And I stopped when it came to the question of autism, and I looked at the science, and I looked at what was going on. That's when I discovered, for myself anyway, that there was a whistleblower that was saying that there was something wrong with the science coming out of CDC. I was so upset, really, about the misrepresentation of science, both by politicians and by the CDC on the question of vaccines and autism. I decided to read 2,000. It turned out to be, I skimmed 3,000, but I read in detail 1,000. I digested, if you will, 2,000. But I really read 1,000 studies that are cited in this book. It's at the back of the room on causality, looking at animal models, looking at cell lines, studies about what is in the vaccines that could possibly induce neurodevelopmental disorders. And I satisfied my intellectual curiosity enough that I thought that we had a good book here. That this is a book about autism. It's not about vaccines. I'm convinced that there's systematic representation, of course, on the question at the highest levels. Next question. Oh, sorry, next slide. I really won't have time to go into all these other projects we're doing in 2017, but I will talk about the first project, the POWER project. We are looking at HPV pathogenesis. We want to know why, at the molecular level, which types of HPV might induce tissue changes. We're looking at the root causes of autoimmunity, and we're working towards vaccine safety screening. If we could screen people first before they were given a vaccine, that they might be at risk, that we can identify. But today I'm going to talk about the POWER project. This is, next slide please. The question of the IPAK POWER study is to say, okay, which studies that have found no association between vaccines and autism actually have a large enough sample size, that were designed correctly to have enough patients, to study enough patients, to be able to find an association between vaccines and autism if it did indeed exist. It's not asking the question, does it exist? It's a hypothetical, and it's done all the time. It's supposed to be done before the studies are conducted to make sure that you've designed your study correctly. And so you'll hear about, there's a new study out from Johns Hopkins University, and they studied 400,000 patients who underwent MRI, and they found this and they found that. Why is it 400,000? Why isn't it 20? Right? So the reason why it's 400,000 is because you need a large sample size to detect rare events. Okay? It's just the nature of the science, and I'm hoping that I can share this with you in a profoundly fundamental way where everybody can understand it. Next slide, please. So, raise your hand if you've heard that the science is settled on the question of vaccines and autism. Okay. I'm not going to ask you to raise your hand if you believe that that's correct. But in actuality, there are dozens of studies that are cited. This is Rir Al-Shishab, who right now is the acting director of CDC. This was many years ago now, with Elizabeth Warren, Senator Elizabeth Warren, asking her what are really scripted lowball questions. So you're saying that there's no study that shows vaccines cause autism? Well, one of the things in that dialogue, which I review in the book, was that Ryoka Shusha came out and basically said there's no credible science that shows, of any kind. She didn't say clinical studies, no credible studies of any kind that show that vaccines could cause autism. And also, Safe Minds, the organization Safe Minds, had gotten some minutes out from a critical meeting at the Institutes of Medicine, where they were asked to review all of the science on the question. This was in 2000, after 2004, 2006, and so on. And the report came out in 2012 that I'm going to talk about today. And in that report, one of the participants asked about, well, should we look at the animal studies? Should we look at the cell line studies? Should we look at the basic science? And the answer that was given totally made my blood run cold. The answer that was given was, I don't have a free weekend to do that, do you? And that's in the minutes. And so that's why I have a book. I read 2,000 studies because the Institutes of Medicine neglected to do their duty. Next slide. So how many studies again? So the IOM 2012 report, and I'm going to read this to you. The committee has a high degree of confidence in the epidemiologic evidence based on 4 studies with validity and precision to assess an association between MMR vaccine and autism. These studies consistently report a null association, which means they couldn't reject the null hypothesis in 4 studies. So the causality conclusion, and this is what was told to the CDC, this is what was told to the Special Masters Court by the Institutes of Medicine, the National Academy of Sciences. Causality conclusion, the evidence favors rejection of a causal relationship in an MMR vaccine and autism. 4 studies. Let me tell you how they got down to 4 studies from dozens. Next slide. So here we have up here the 1,200 or so studies that were in PubMed when I did a search, autism and genetic risk. And here we have about 1,000 studies, genetic and environmental causes of autism. And then this green dot is autism and environmental. The silver dot is autism, aluminum and neurotoxin. And then autism and neurotoxins, the red dot. This is US CDC's dozens of studies, and those are studies not rejected in that 2012 report as flawed. So next slide, please. There were 22 studies in this IOM report initially cited, and they whittled it down to 4 that they had confidence in. They rejected 17 studies. Do you know, anybody know that, familiar with the study DeStefano et al., 2004? Raise your hand. That was one of them that they rejected as flawed, by the way. So next slide. Oh, no, this slide, sorry. So in a typical association study, we have vaccinated versus unvaccinated, and we have the disease outcome. Or we have treated versus untreated. We have the disease outcome. This would be a case control study where we have vaccinated and unvaccinated, and some people who are vaccinated have ASD and some don't, and some people who are unvaccinated have ASD and some don't. Is that clear? Okay, next slide. So they use something called odds ratio, or they might use relative risk ratio, where they're looking at this and they're doing the math, and they say what proportion of cases that have exposure have the disease, and that would be A over C within the disease. And then they look at the odds of exposure for cases the odds of exposure in cases that don't have the disease, and so they have B over D. And so then they take the ratio of those 2 ratios. This is standard stuff, and then they come up with an odds ratio. Next slide, please. Positive results, that is, they reject the null hypothesis, is when the positive association is there and you have a ratio of greater than 1. Much greater than 1, 1.2, 1.3, whatever, it depends on your sample size, really. And you should have small confidence intervals, because if you do the study, and let's say the middle of the stage is 0, or is 1, okay, a ratio of 1. And if you're at 1.2 over here, right, you might have a confidence interval that's so wide that it includes 0. And so they say, well, it's not different than 0. If you're 95% confidence interval, and that's based on the sample size as well. So remember, the middle of the stage is 1. And we want to be over here if we find a positive association, and we want to be at 1 if there's no association. The ratio should be the same, no difference between those populations. Next slide, please. A negative result is at 1, but you can also sometimes find a truly negative association where you're over here, where you're less than 1. So here's 0, and here's like 0.8, and here's 1. And you might find a 0.6 and 0.5. Well, how to interpret that can be tricky, but I'm going to help you understand that in this case in detail. Next slide. So there's ways to get negative results where the ratio of the incidence, or the prevalence, the incidence of the disease is the same between the two populations. One is that it's true, okay? There's no difference, right? So you guys are kind of split on the two halves of the room here, and I've counted up the coins in your pocket and got an average amount of change over here, an average amount of change over here. There probably would be no difference. There's a large enough sample size, and the ratio, the amount would be the same. And that can happen. There's no difference, no problem. But sometimes we end up with a negative result just because you didn't work hard enough. You didn't have a large enough sample size. So if I only took 3 people from this side of the room at random and 3 people from this side of the room at random, odds are somebody over here might have $13.78 and they're changing their pocket for some reason, and these 3 people might not have any. So with a small sample size, there's high variation. The variation takes over the signal, okay? That's why we need a large enough sample size for both sides of the room so we can get an estimate of the amount of money. So if I took about 15 from here and 15 from there, that number would be the estimate about money of change here and the estimate amount of change here, and that would be reasonable, and I would probably find a difference if it did exist. But it doesn't exist, right? You guys didn't get together beforehand and give all your money to this side of the room, did you? Right? So another problem here is selection bias. So there can be unseen factors, like, if you want to understand, is lung cancer from smoking genetic, you have a problem. Because kids who watch their parents die from cancer from smoking don't smoke. That's self-selection. They're going to move themselves out of that clinical population. They don't want to see the same thing happen, and so that kind of bias can impose itself, and that's why you have to do randomized clinical trials to know basically anything. Same thing likely happens here with this vaccine avoidance bias, where some people who have kids might have started vaccinating and then stopped vaccinating due to an adverse event. And they might have had a serious enough adverse event early on to go on to develop autism through other environmental exposures, including the last vaccine. And so there's biases. This is not a straightforward random thing. This is not a fair game, if you will. Next slide, please. So when they rejected, did we go the right way? Go on to the next slide. I urge everyone to get a hold of this result and read the reasons why they rejected these studies. They rejected them because they were just poorly designed studies. It is par for the course for CDC to poorly designed studies. 17 out of 22. Okay, next slide. And the 5 remaining control studies are Farrington, Madsen, Mauser, Goodson, Smith, Taylor. Okay, 2 of those studies are actually the same data analyzed twice, that's why there's 4. Next slide, please. And so I looked at the numbers. How many patients are in each of these studies? And the largest study in these groups had, those are the males, the males in the group, not the full study. The full study had over 500,000, 500,000 total sample size. The next one had 96 and 192 patients. That was one of the critical studies that they used to say the vaccine does not cause autism, and there were 4. 96 and 192. If the prevalence of vaccines is 1%, that means that they had a very, very high chance of not being able to detect enough cases of autism, let alone association. Okay? So you can see intuitively they didn't have enough power to detect a difference. Another study that was small was the Taylor case series. Smith was 1,294 versus about 4,500, and those are large numbers. And they're like, okay, well, that's pretty impressive. But it all depends on the prevalence of the disease. Next slide, please. So statistical power is the ability to detect a difference if it does in fact exist. And so this is math. This isn't new data. This isn't new measurements from patients. This is the math that every vaccine safety study that has ever been done and should ever be done in the future should do before the study is conducted. I've never seen them publish a power study. So it's determined by various factors, like your type 1 error risk, if you've ever had statistics, that's the chance that you're going to find an association by chance. You know, like I told you, there might be a high, probability if you have a small sample size. The variation that we talked about, the variance, the effect size, which is really how big the effect is. And this is something you've got to understand, right? So if smoking caused cancer in every person who ever smoked a single cigarette, that's a huge effect size, right? But we know that that's not true. It causes cancer in a minority of patients. If vaccines, every time you vaccinated a child, they immediately regress into autism, that's a huge effect size. But we know that that's not true too. Current estimates are a woeful 2% of the population may have autism from any source. And so the one thing that we can control as scientists is the sample size. How much work are we willing to do? And how many patients do we have in our study? Next slide. Now, I want to talk about, this is not just me. Power analysis is standard par for the course. And there's a review out in 2003 where they said that the average statistical power studies in neurosciences is very low. The consequences of this include overestimates of the effect size, okay, and low reproducibility results. There are also ethical dimensions to this problem, as unreliable research is inefficient and wasteful, and I would add dangerous when it comes to public health. Next slide, please. So these are classified as retrospective studies. Some are case studies, some are case series, cohorts, case control, and so on. But nevertheless, they all used relative incidence, relative risk, conditional logistic regression, or odds ratio. None of that really matters. The most important question is, did they have a large enough sample size? And they all end up using confidence intervals. That's one way to do hypothesis testing. There's other ways to do hypothesis testing. Next slide, please. The post-hoc power analysis is after the study's done. And there's some problems in doing this. Okay, I'll admit it. Once you do a study, you already have an effect size. From the same data, right? So if you do a study on the coins that we talked about, and these guys had $4.25, not for coffee or something, and these guys had $4.05, the effect size is just a mere, a small effect size. If I use that effect size in the calculation of the power to detect a difference, it's a tautology. That effect size is already small. And so I'm going around in circles and say, look, you need a huge sample size, right? But therefore you wouldn't know anything. And that's a real problem if you do post hoc analysis that way, but we didn't. Next slide. In reality, what we're not interested in is a small effect size. We're interested in were there studies powered enough to find even a big effect size. Okay, so we're actually not doing the circular argument post hoc analysis. That turns out to be critically important, because when I go to publish this, I'm going to get into a fight with reviewers. They're going to say you're not supposed to do post hoc analysis, but they're going to see, like you don't understand, I'm interested in the 1.2s and the 1.3s, not the tiny little odds ratio that they reported. Next slide, please. And I'm sorry this is all text, but I hope you're following. So this one is a case control, this is a self-controlled case series. They published it twice. They did their own power analysis. I'll take their word for it. This is the one study that did a power analysis. It's a statistician, Farrington's a statistician from the UK. The problem is they use the patients themselves as control for the outcome. And so it's really like a time series. And so any biases that exist are not controlled by randomization across groups. Okay? That's a serious problem, but nevertheless, we're just going to put this study to the side for now. Next slide, please. This is the same study analyzed another way, still susceptible to biases. But the one thing that the Taylor study found, and this is interesting and important for Dr. Wakefield's situation, this study concluded that statistically it was very difficult, their main conclusion, to get an accurate timing of diagnosis for these kids using parent input. It's the same thing that Dr. Wakefield saw. Okay, next slide, please. This is a tiny case control study, 96 cases and 192 matched controls. The ages range from 2 to 15 years, so they're diagnosing over a large range of time. They didn't just do the 2 to 3 years that we're interested in, and they found odds ratios of less than 1. Well, every study that's done this type of analysis, even the ones that were rejected by the IOM, tend to find negative odds ratios. And that's really weird, because we're looking for a positive association. And it's almost like vaccines are protecting against autism in some way. That's what a negative, a less than one autism, a less than one ratio would mean. So I'm going to give you an explanation for it, a definitive explanation for that. Next slide. So this is a power curve. If you're changing the effect size here, those are the variables that are input. The sample size is needed, where they did 96 and 192. To find an odd ratio of 1.2, they need over 100,000 patients. This study is woefully underpowered to find a positive association. This study should have been rejected by the IOM. Next slide, please. So now we go from 4 to 3. Smith et al., with the 991 cases and 4,500 controls, okay, to find a positive association, say of 1.2 or so, and the smaller the odds ratio, by the way, you need a larger sample size. They needed, about 8,000 to 15,000 patients, all told. They had about 1,000 versus 4,500. We're down to 2. This study should have been rejected by the IOM for being low powered. We're down to 2. Next slide, please. The Madsen study, this is the one everybody gets excited about, because they had over 500,000 patients. And they were really excited about it. You talk about statistical power in this study. And in fact, they said that the power of our test here is made evident is reflected in the narrow 95% confidence interval. Remember I told you, if you're at 0, if you find 1, right, you have a confidence interval, and it includes 0, you can't reject 0. They said we have a narrow confidence interval, and they have a large sample size. Okay. Next slide. They found odds ratios of 0.6 to 1.25 was the odds ratio. Odds ratio 0.92, there it is, less than 1. 0.83, less than 1 after they adjusted. Okay? But the children were vaccinated in 15 to 17 months, and the mean age of autism diagnosis was 4 years, 3 months. Are they even studying the relevant population for the schedule at the time? And for autism spectrum disorder, 5 years, 3 months. Next slide, please. So the Madsen study, we determined absolutely that Madsen was powered specifically in the males. And this is a smoking gun. We took the numbers from the study for the males, and we calculated the power that exists for that study. Now that power could have been, in terms of an odds ratio, a relative risk rate, those odds could have been 1.5, they could have been 1.8, they could have been 3, okay? They could have been any number on the number spectrum. When we did the analysis, it was 2.000. It was powered to detect an odds ratio specifically of 2.000. And I don't know if you know anything about doing epidemiological studies, but if you draw data from a database, first thing you do is you try to get all the data that you can. That's random. That is a random variable, right? How do you get a study that's powered exactly for an odds ratio of 2.0? You do it by determining the sample size that's needed for an effect size of 2.0. They did that intentionally, okay, for the test of the proportion. That means that this study could not have, at 500,000 patients, could not have detected, all right, anything less than 2.0. So if there's an association of 1.2 and it's real, or an association of 1.5, or an association of 1.8, they never would have detected it. I mean, they would have, at 1.8 they might have had a chance, like a 50% chance. But what if the effect size is 1.1 or 1.01 because the prevalence is so small? 0 chance of finding the effect size in the prevalences that exist in autism at the time. 0 chance, close to 0. Smoking gun, I couldn't believe it. When I did the math and it came out, bam, 2.000. It blew my mind. Next slide, please. So I asked the question, how many additional patients would have had to have developed ASD from an MMR? This is an MMR study. Okay, now when you do an MMR study at the time, some of these kids have other vaccines, right? So they already have exposure to vaccines. So the unvaccinated to MMR have already been exposed to vaccines. And if other vaccines contribute to autism, not just MMR, you already have a very poorly designed study to ask questions about vaccines in general. But this is just math again. So what I did was I played a game with the numbers on purpose. I've been telling you, I'm not cheating. I looked to to calculate and determine the number of patients that I would need to move from the vaccinated no autism group into the vaccinated autism, sorry, the reverse. How many would I have? How many kids that got vaccines and had autism would I have to remove from the sample into the kids that got vaccines but didn't have autism, or got MMR and didn't have autism? And next slide, please. This is the expected odds ratio, and this is the additional patients needed with that I would have to move. And it turns out, because there were 196, it is mathematically exactly half. What does that tell you? What it tells me is that they had a result that showed association, and it was a strong association. And they took kids out of the study that had autism with vaccines, and they said, well, they really didn't have autism. And if you look at what they did in terms of their justification of their study design, it's there. They did exactly that. The diagnosis is uncertain. Okay, it's all there in the Madsen study. Exactly half. Now, why would they get exactly half? Who would come up with a number of exactly half? Someone who knew that the power to detect was at 2.0, because if you do exactly half, you end up at 1. Where were we in the countdown? 2? Okay, next slide. Now, the number of patients needed to be moved to MMR and autism from MMR with no autism, and this is the percent increase in autism vaccinated. It's only a 10% increase in that population. Okay, it's only the autism. It's only a 10% change. Sorry, that's a small change, but it's exactly in the other group. This should say unvaccinated, autism unvaccinated. It's only a 10% change in that larger group, so it'd be barely noticeable. Even moving 200 patients would be barely noticeable because you're dealing with 4,000. Okay, next slide. So either the diagnosis was wrong in 224 patients. Is the diagnosis typically wrong in half of your autism patients if you randomly go to a database? I doubt it. Or the diagnosis was altered intentionally to reduce the relative risk by precisely 1/2. Now, I'm not the first person to criticize this. I'm just showing you numbers. What does it mean? Well, Mark Blaxill found that patients with ASD were moved to the unvaccinated group. I found that after we did the power analysis. He looked at the study and he reported that. Statistical, which includes some of this effort from Dr. Wakefield, said that adjusting for age, the adjustment of the overall study was inappropriate. Look at the huge range of age they studied. And Cochrane said that the length of analysis was too long. That's a serious problem. Now, what I've shown here is it proves that they moved patients. You don't have these numbers. This is a smoking gun. Statistically, you don't see that kind of thing. You never see 2.0000 as a odds ratio that you're powered to detect a specific power that way, unless it was intentional. These data are manipulated. Next slide, please. So we look at males and females, and we do the same kind of analysis. The software couldn't give me a result because they could not have detected any odds ratio given the small prevalence in males and females, because the male effect was large enough you could at least get there and say, okay, but we add the females there, and the prevalence is so tiny in the control group. And the power calculations don't use the prevalence in the case group. They're only based on the prevalence in the control group. We changed the odds ratio, so it tells us what we could detect. They said you can't do this study. This software said, no, there's not enough samples here to do anything. That's what I mean. These studies basically should never have been conducted. It's as if they never existed. And yet, we're down to one study. Next slide. Now, remember I said they claimed that they had enough power for narrow confidence intervals. So I'm going to stand at 1. And what's the narrow confidence interval to you? A narrow confidence interval is that if they have something like 0.8, it shouldn't overlap with 1. Or it shouldn't overlap with 2. I mean, it's narrow. And they claim to have enough power on the basis of this. And let's look at it. Go ahead, next slide. So here's 1, right here if you can't see it. And their estimates are here, and it overlaps with 1, and it overlaps with 1.25. So they're saying that we found 0.83, and we have narrow confidence intervals, so we're confident that there's no association. But their confidence interval includes way over here. Now, if you flip that around and they found that this was their point estimate of 1.25 and their confidence interval included 0, they would say, got to reject the null. I have some special words that I'm not saying because we're in a place, a holy place. But this is very upsetting to me to see this corruption of science and this misuse of science and abuse of science. Next slide, please. So let me tell you the sample sizes that they needed if you're going to do a subgroup analysis in the males. They needed close to 1 million patients in their study to say anything interesting scientifically about autism. So they pull out their 500,000 and they say, look, we've got 500,000. It's huge. Sufficiently powered with no power calculation at all. They were woefully underpowered. This study should have been rejected by the IOM. Next slide, please. And if you look at overall, both males and females, you're looking at close to 2 million is necessary because the prevalence of autism is so small in the control population to detect the difference. And it is small. I mean, people criticize me for saying autism is rare. In this population, it's not rare. But in the overall population, 1%. That's difficult to detect, 1%, unless you have huge numbers. You agreed with me on that. I don't mean to diminish the importance of autism by saying that it's rare, but it's relatively rare. Next slide, please. So, here's a problem with retrospective studies. And why moving forward, we should never allow retrospective studies again. I mentioned it earlier. But parents who have kids who previously experienced an adverse event are likely not to vaccinate again. They could have had a seizure when they were 6 months old. They could have had a seizure when they were a year old. Then they come up to the MMR and they say, well, no, thank you. So now they're unvaccinated, right? And that's going to mess with, patients that are in the vaccinated versus the unvaccinated group for that study. It could be this, except for the 2.0000. That is a smoking gun. So always and forever remember that MMR versus MMR, no MMR is not vaccinated versus unvaccinated. It's as if the study of vaccines never happened. And all of the studies so far that are used and held up that say there's no link between vaccines and autism specifically are based on MMR only. Okay, next slide, please. So how much time do I have, Tony?
You still got some more time.
I'm doing good. Okay, good. So I might have some time for questions, which is really good. So the association paradigm, I want to review. The association paradigm, instead of the randomized clinical control, the prospective study, does not constitute a critical test of causality. So even if it was powered enough and they found a result, I'd still have a problem with it. Because if they find every study that has been done, like the Gallagher study where they found association, the critics of that study say, well, it's insufficient proof for causality. So it's not a critical test. What are you doing? You're wasting our time, you're wasting our money. You're wasting our kids' lives, their brains. There's exposure biases and so on. Healthy user bias. Think about it. Previous adverse event bias. That just makes that a worthless exercise. And if there's anybody from the news here, you could please quote me on that. That the past vaccine science has been a worthless exercise. The association study paradigms failed in part due to the unseen effects of insufficient statistical power. Have I convinced you that there's not enough power in these studies? Okay. The IOM of all entities, and this is where I go between being a scientist and being an activist. These are my people, my people, my community. My postdoctoral advisor is a National Academy of Science member. This is very painful for me to see them fall flat on their face this way. These are the most esteemed scientists in our country, and I have to say, the IOM failed us terribly. 3 out of the 4 studies are woefully underpowered, could never have detected a positive association. The remaining study overdraws its conclusions. It basically shows that there's a lot of sloppiness in the diagnosis dates. And I'm here to say Dr. Wakefield's hypothesis has not been debunked. And the IOM missed the opportunity to prevent over 1 million new cases of autism since 2004, simply because they didn't consider doing some calculations for the power of the test. Next slide, please. So going forward, we should do prediction studies, not association studies. I don't even like randomized clinical trials unless you do biomarkers to predict. The most important study that I can think of for vaccines and autism is the one that says, give me 1 million patients who are going to be vaccinated anyway, or not vaccinated anyway, on the basis of their choice. Okay? And prospectively collect samples, serum samples, genetic samples, saliva. Study the genes, study the proteins in the serum, look at family history risk, family history of rheumatoid arthritis, there's other risk factors that are known. Put those all in a database, and I'll store those data, and then let time progress. Unfortunately, let time progress. Have the vaccine versus not vaccinated happen prospectively. Study them all of them. The exclusion criteria don't matter. If you're going to make an assessment about the effects of vaccines on a population and make an inference that's generalized to the population, it has to include the population. Don't exclude them on the basis of the fact that their doctor shouldn't have vaccinated them because they have a neurological disorder. Everyone. And then let's see if these biomarkers could have told us who would have had serious adverse events from those vaccines. And then if we have that information, then we can change clinical practice. And we can say, hey, you know what, there's a red dot on my screen here, you probably should get this vaccine. The healthcare system saying that you're contraindicated based on your genetics. That's the future that we want to build. We want to protect people. We also want to get the aluminum out of vaccines. I could talk for another 3 hours on aluminum vaccines. One of the results that we have has led me to call for a ban on vaccines in the NICU because 250 micrograms of aluminum in hepatitis B exceeds the CFR FDA limit of 45 micrograms per kilogram per day by something like 30 times in a 7.5 pound baby. Well, really, you have a 2 kilogram baby, and you're going to be dosing them 15 days worth of the safe level of aluminum for non-dietary sources. The pundits online, they like to argue, well, that you get more from food. You get more, well, it's true, you get more aluminum from food if you're an adult, but 99.9% of it passes through your body without ever getting into your blood system, into your spleen, exposed to your organs, your kidneys, your brain. But in a vaccine, those 250 micrograms are all injected, all of them. And they either have to be processed, right? So then the next gambit that they say is, well, it leaves the body quickly. Well, it really doesn't. It takes about a week. You go way up high like this in the concentration, and it takes about a week to get out. Well, it's getting out. It's going through your organs. It's in your body. It's hurting your brain, and it's hurting your kidneys and so on. So you have to excrete them. But it has a half-life of about 7 years. Any aluminum that goes in the brain is there for 7 years. And there it shuts down astrocytes, and the astrocytes can't uptake the glutamate to tell the microglia not to chew up the brain. So we end up with, in the autistic brain, many one-to-one connections like this, because you can't make complex connections in the brain. And if you could make those complex connections, then the perception signals that come in would then be silenced, because there's a satiation effect. Like, who here is thinking of the fact that they're sitting on a chair? Well, now you are, because I said it, but you weren't thinking about it just a minute ago, right? But you cancel that out. Who here knows my last name? Raise your hand if you know my last name. What is it? Okay, Lyons-Weiler. Okay, now who here knows my last name? Raise your hand. Lyons-Weiler. Who here knows my name? Say it. Lyons-Weiler. So now you have a complex connection there, and I hope it stays there because I'm on Amazon.com. But this complex connection specifically didn't exist a few moments ago, and hopefully it'll stay there. Honestly, I really want to, you're my family. I consider you my extended family. But with a brain that has aluminum or mercury-induced microglial activation, these complex neuronal structures that give the feedback that says, stop telling me I'm sitting on the chair. Stop telling me that light's there, that little buzz over here. Stop telling me that somebody just closed a door. Those signals come in repeatedly, over and over and over again. I'm sitting on a chair, I'm sitting on a chair. The television's on, mom's using a blender, mom's, all of that comes over and over and over again. Without the feedback, this kid gets overwhelmed. And so they need complex neuronal structure, they need brain health. So the next thing I want to tell you is that the studies that I reviewed in the book have me convinced that these signals, because of the simplified one-to-one connections, make it into the brain, they go course through the brain so far and so deep that they make it to the motor neural cortex. That part of the brain evolved one and only one function, which was to move body parts. And it can only interpret brain signals to move. And so, based on this perception overwhelming, they start flapping their hands. Okay? And they start having, repetitive motions or echolalia, things that, it's not intentional on their part in any way. And you know that. So to be able to understand, my question about this book was, what is autism? It wasn't the vaccines cause autism. That wasn't what I went for. I studied autism. I feel like we were on the cusp of a better understanding about how to keep our brains healthy. We all need complex neuronal structures, right? We all need to make sure that microglia, if you have a stroke, the glutamate is high in your brain. It's a signal that says that you have brain damage coming, there's an injury. Or if you have a viral infection, same thing, glutamate in the brain. It's the same thing as monosodium glutamate. Take monosodium glutamate out of your diet for brain health, okay? But this glutamate in the brain keeps the microglia activated. That's the signal that says that there's a problem. And the astrocytes are supposed to take it up. They're the vacuum cleaners, and they're supposed to mop it all up. But the aluminum specifically inhibits that activity. And it does, mercury does terrible things too. So, we'd like to see vaccines without aluminum. We'd like to see immunization without aluminum. We'd like to see them without unsafe epitopes, the ones that match proteins. I don't want to take a foreign protein from a virus or bacteria, put it in my body with an adjuvant, and then teach it to attack some of my tissues. And when IPAK looked at the sequences that are present in the pathogens, proteins in the vaccines, I was stunned to see how many matches and the degree of high matching between these epitopes. Because it's simple to take them out. You can make an artificial, source of epitopes and not include the ones that match humans. We can stand on the cusp of a new era of artificial immunization without hurting ourselves, and that's an important next phase, I think. But do I think it's going to happen? I don't know. I hope so. It depends on the future, right? It depends on what we do. It depends on what you do. It depends on organizations like this one. It depends on whether IPAK is going to be successful. But the studies that were done, they should have asked the parents, why? You're in the unvaccinated group. Why? Is it because you had a previous adverse event? They didn't ask those questions. They just said, okay, your vaccination status is based on the medical records. The doctors, the medical community needs to start to see the people as people, not just numbers. And of course, all vaccine safety studies going forward should be sufficiently powered. The power analysis should happen first. Shouldn't be funded unless they can show that if there is a hypothetical positive association, this study is designed well enough to find it. Next slide. Here's the software that I used. Next slide. Anybody can do these calculations, and here are the citations of the studies, and I thank you for your time. Tony's saying we got 10 minutes for questions, so anybody have any questions? Yes?
Why can't we, instead of doing...
You want to give him a mic so everybody can hear?
I got a lot of this. Instead of doing prediction studies, why can't we look at the Amish community who are unvaccinated, look at them compared to the vaccinated group? Would you not have enough data from that?
That would be a fascinating study. I think that's an important arm of this. Then what you would then, by doing that, you would say people who are not Amish, tend not to have vaccines. It's actually a confounded study then to say apply it to the rest of the clinical population. It's a valid study, but the inferences there could be due to other things that Amish people do or don't do. And so if you're going to make an inference, about, in the Farrington study, when I say they overrode their conclusions, they did exactly this. They knew that the data that they were looking at was related to MMR. But if you read the text of the paper, I just went there. But if you read the text of the paper, they talk about vaccines in general. It's the same kind of error. If you're going to study Amish versus non-Amish, then that's what that inference allows you to do, is to make generalizations about that, those differences. And there are large differences. There's genetic differences, and so how are we ever going to know that it's not something unique to the Amish other than vaccines? Yes?
Feedback on that. So, were you saying that there was not a consistent non-vaccinated group? There were vaccinated versus unvaccinated, and unvaccinated could have had some series of shots prior from still being unvaccinated. To me, that was one of my goals here, because when I see unvaccinated, I think totally non-vaccinated.
Right, so you read the studies closely. Yeah, the question was, I'll repeat it for the video. The question was, am I saying that in this collection of studies, did the unvaccinated kids get other vaccines? And the answer is yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. So they had other vaccines. And when you overdraw your conclusions of your study, you're supposed to withdraw the study, retract it. It's just not fair that these studies are sitting out there and that they're cited and they're held up by the IOM and the CDC as, the best science that's available.
They've never, ever done a true unvaccinated versus vaccinated. They wouldn't dare do that because I believe it would be so evident. It's kind of like how they do the studies and they call it, like it's not even a saline, it's not even a placebo.
You're talking about placebo.
Placebo. They lie about that. They actually have the adjuvant in the so-called placebo.
Right.
So that's fraudulent there. The reason they're not willing to do it is because they know the egregious, salient results, I believe, that's my opinion, that if they were to take an authentically unvaccinated child and look at their immune markers and look at their immunity.
Yeah.
I mean, I've seen it. I work at a school for children with autism. And I've watched this. I got the Safe Minds report back in 2001
Yeah.
when the IOM did their study. I watched what I call the horror unfold. It went from 1 in 10,000 to 1 in 65 or whatever the
Yeah.
statistic is now.
Yeah.
But I want to learn how to speak the language because statistics is a language. I was a French major, so I got to study this.
Bonjour.
Bonjour.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So let's that's exactly right. So let's set the record straight here. One of the criticisms that we get when we dare talk about vaccine safety, of course, is that here are these horrific monsters who don't care about kids. And then if we talk about autism as some kind of brain damage, which it is, it's microglial activated apoptosis, your cells die, kills your neural precursor cells, can't make connections, that's not good. Raise your hand if you don't mind, if you have an autistic child or a child on the spectrum. Raise your hand, way up high. Raise your hand if you have a niece or a nephew who has an autistic diagnosis, an ASD diagnosis. Okay, now raise your other hand. Keep them up, keep them up. Raise your other hand if you love those children with all your might. Okay, it's a no-brainer. It's just a bad propaganda campaign. I see a question there.
The gentleman who brought up the Amish in their community that they don't vaccinate, one of my very best friends is ex-Amish, and she's in her 40s, and she is completely, as a child, she was vaccinated. So the Amish aren't even at this point a viable group of people to study. They have also, Esther left the Amish, had children, and she fully vaccinated them. There are family members on her side, her mother,
Yeah.
those people are, even her mother in her 60s is receiving a flu shot now because her doctor said it was the right thing to do. So unfortunately, I think we need to put that idea of, the Amish, that they are our go-to, that, what do you call that?
A control group?
Yes, there you go. We're going to use them because even they're at the same point we are,
Yeah. Well, I'll tell you, whatever study is going to go forward, asking the question, does vaccines cause autism is an incomplete question itself. There's other toxins. The science that goes forward should be more clinically relevant to the problem, the fact that vaccines cause autism. What do we do about it? Yeah. Yes, another question.
Thank you for the great talk. And I just have a question about what you just mentioned towards the end of your talk about taking aluminum out of vaccine. So I'm actually studying with the naturopath. So from a naturopathic perspective, there can be no safe vaccine because anything you inject into your body is going to poison it. So what exactly are your thoughts on like, the quote safe vaccines that I hear a lot being thrown around? Because in my mind, there cannot be a safe vaccine.
Well, you know, measles, mumps, mild diseases, but they do come with some mortality and some morbidity. There's a non-zero risk. That's why we call them diseases. That's why we call them an illness, right? So if you have proteins, first of all, I don't want to say that I or anyone else could ever make a safe vaccine. But taking mercury out, taking ozone out, and taking out unsafe epitopes might make them safer. And I would certainly expect that we would do rigorous studies to assess both the serious and moderate adverse events. And of course, we have to track them in a thorough manner, not a passive, way. I think every medical office should, everybody that does healthcare, that does vaccinate with old or new types of, artificial immunization, should be required by law to track and report accurately adverse events. This should not be a controversy. This should be the #1 priority in our population because our children's minds are our best assets.
Can I follow up quickly with that? So I don't know if you're aware, but there is a study that was done by the FDA, I believe in 2000, that looked at the DNA molecules in vaccines and if they do cause cancer. And the paper is actually published. It's already there. It's by Keith, I believe. And the conclusion was that the DNA fragments in vaccines actually do cause cancer. They cause cancer in animal studies that they did over a period of time. So if you require proteins and things to culture vaccines in, and then these things are known to cause cancer, this is where I have a problem understanding of wrapping my mind around the safer or safe vaccine.
Well, let me tell you, if I told you that my idea of safe immunization was to wait until your child got a cold, right? So their immune system was already activated, and then expose them to a single epitope, a purified single epitope from the measles, and that was screened that it didn't look like any human proteins, and all you do is put the patch on your skin, so it hits the dendritic cells. Then we might be talking about something about a safer vaccine. I don't want DNA in vaccines. It doesn't belong there. Foreign DNA is no good, and I'm out of time, so thank you.
Thanks, Jack. Okay, we're going to take a quick break till 10:15, and then Dr. Tenpenny will be up. So feel free to go down and get coffee, water, use the restroom, or whatever, and we'll see you back here at 10:15. Thanks.